start with. I kind of knew where I would be, what I'd be preaching on before we even went to camp, because I know every year at camp I kind of have some of the same feelings on this matter. So, 1 John 2. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and stand up for these two. It won't take but just a second. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of the Father abideth forever. Amen. You could be seated, and then also turn over to 2 Corinthians while you're sitting. Or I'll let you sit first, and then look. Then you can turn there. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. All right, so that verse I just read talked about not loving the world and how we're supposed to not go after the things of the world, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. Here we see something similar in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 16. It says, and what agreement hath, okay, hold on, 2 Corinthians 6, 17. Wherefore, come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. It shouldn't be a surprise to Christians that we're supposed to be separated from the world to some degree, and to come out from among them, meaning we need to come out from the world, and it says not touch the unclean thing, and that's a quote from the Old Testament, but we can understand the idea about not loving the world, going after the things of this world, and all that, and we're to come out and to be separate. And every year when we go to camp, I'm reminded about this, and this is why I knew what I was going to preach, because I knew this is going to be I was thinking about during this time. But when you go to camp, we come out from among the world. We're separated from the things of the world. Now, obviously, it's never 100%, because a lot of people there, all of us, we've got the world on us. We've got the philosophies and all that in our heads. So some things are going to come out. It's not like we get away and all of a sudden everything's perfect. But when you go through a whole week of meeting together, the kids particularly, the adults get it too, but the kids get even a little extra dose, because they go to some meetings where not all the counselors necessarily go. There's just a handful of them, and sometimes we're taking that opportunity to go clean up or take care of different things or whatever. But they meet at the flagpole first thing in the morning. They pray, they sing a song, have a quick devotion. And then they have quiet time, where they go up and eat first, and then they go to quiet time where they kind of have a little lesson that they do on their own. They do their own personal Bible reading, and they do that lesson. And then they have separated boys and girls, where there's different preachers that will come in, different pastors that are there, will preach to the kids, man to the men, and a lady to the ladies. And then after that, there's a combined class that they go to. After the combined class, there's a morning chapel where we all go to, including the counselors. And I'm talking about each of these are like, some of these meetings are like an hour long. And then, so after that chapel, we go eat. Then they've got the rest of the day till about 6 o'clock to do competitions where they're preaching to each other, or they're singing to each other, or whatever the case. And they're just nonstop. Not only are we out of the world, we're meeting at a place where there's no devices. We're supposed to take their cell phones and all that kind of stuff, and they're not allowed to have that. Now, we counselors still do, so you'll catch us every once in a while getting caught up on what's going on outside. But they're just constantly hearing the preaching and the reading and all that. Now, some of them are coming in with, there's going to be some that have bad attitudes. Maybe they didn't want to come, or maybe they wanted to come to see the friends and to play and do all this, but I got to sit through all this preaching. I don't see it a lot, because most of the kids are pretty familiar with that. But I suppose there's a few that start the week and say, man, there's just so much preaching and all this. But after a while, they get used to it, and they're just constantly hearing that. At first, I'm sure they're like, man, how come I can't play games? How come I can't call my friends? How come I can't be on the internet? And then after a while, they're just like, wow, there is life without the internet and the video games. And after a while, the Spirit is just being filled within them, and their spirit, and they're getting things right with the Lord. They're coming down to the altars, and they're praying, and they're doing all this, and people obviously are getting saved that came to camp weren't saved. Obviously, we want to get that taken care of. But it's just a really nice week. Some even come. I would say some kids come with bad intentions. Hey, when I get there, I'm gonna go find some guys. Maybe I'm gonna go find the girls, or maybe I'm gonna fight this guy that he said something mean to me last year or whatever. I'm sure there's some come with bad attitudes, and then after all the preaching and all this stuff, they're brainwashed. Okay, now this is what the world would say. Oh, they're going to that camp and they're brainwashing those kids. You got it right. We're brainwashing. Why? Because their brains are dirty. They need to be washed. Okay, and so we are. We're not a weird cult or something like that, but we're getting all that garbage out of there, and we're filling it with good stuff, good singing, good preaching. And there's, like I said, there's still flesh, there's still sinning going on, there's still human nature, but we understand that is almost like the ideal, perfect type of a week for the Christian to have, where they just come out from among the world, and they're not associated with all the philosophies and stuff. In fact, I'll tell you this: after a week of going to camp, on the way home, you stop in the gas station, and you're just like looking at beer signs, and you're just seeing people that aren't dressed right and all this, and you almost feel really weird. Like, what am I going to? That's just how it is. Okay, so what I wonder is, if the Bible tells us as Christians to come out from among them, the Bible tells us not to love the world and the things of the world, how is it possible that we could, or is it possible that we can kind of live in this type of bubble, where we're protected from the things of the world and we're walking with Christ and doing all those kinds of things, not to that extent necessarily, but where we have that as Christians. So I wanted to think about that a minute, and I'll tell you the first, and I'll just give you a little spoiler. This isn't even a possibility, but the first, theoretical possibility would be that as a church, we just do like camp, and we just meet and, live together, maybe get a compound. We all move in together, we live together, we just constantly have Bible. It's just like a big camp that we just live there. We just meet every day as a church. We just kind of do that. Now, there are some people that think that would be the best way to go, and again, there are some cults that have tried that, and they end up drinking poison and killing themselves and believing all kinds of weird stuff. There's some weird cults out there throughout history. We know that we couldn't do that, and even if we could do that and we did that, we wouldn't be obeying the Bible, because the Bible tells us to go out and to reach people and to do all those things. The Bible tells us to work and to provide for our own. Well, how you work? I mean, the only way we could possibly do that is like those cults did, by the way, where they sell all their property and then they just kind of split it up and lived off of that. The cult leader took all the money and then just distributed a little bit at a time as he needed, and eventually they run out of money, and then they're in trouble. Okay, actually, the early church at Jerusalem did something like that. If you remember, they're all selling their property and they're doing those things. Look at, if you would, to Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5, verse 42. I love this verse, and I kind of use it almost as a theme verse for our church, and I think it's kind of like a play on the word temple, because Iola Baptist Temple. It says, "And daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ." And so I think in my head, like, man, wouldn't it be neat if every single day of the week there's something going on? We're either out there preaching, knocking on doors, or we're meeting at people's houses doing Bible studies, or we're having a church service, or we're doing something like that. And theoretically, I do believe a church could do that, where they've got something going on every day of the week and there's just always busy. But I don't think it's realistic that everybody would be there to every single one of those things. That's not possible. But here we see that to some degree in Jerusalem. Now, this isn't every church that's mentioned in the New Testament. This was that first church that was meeting there right after the Lord, rose up and ascended up to the Father. They're left behind. They don't know how long it's going to be before the Lord comes back. They don't know what's going to happen. And so they just sell everything, and they're just like, let's go do it. And they go out preaching the word, and great things happen. But then eventually they get into trouble where, they don't have any money. And Paul actually has to tell people, hey, they helped out the poor saints in Jerusalem, but Paul had to tell them, like, you got to work or you can't eat. You've got to go work in the world, and you got to do these things. But let's look at Hebrews chapter 10. Here's a familiar passage. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25. Many years later, Paul says this, as he's talking this just kind of general letter that he writes to the Hebrews. And he says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Now, I used to think, and I've probably shared this with you before because my mind kind of changed on this verse, but I used to preach this and think about this whenever I read it to say, we need to meet more and more. We need to have more church and work in some more services. And I'm like thinking about this goal of meeting every day of the week until I realized, number one, that's not a possibility. And number two, how can you meet more than 7 days a week? They met daily in the temple and house to house in the book of the early church. Is he saying they need to get back to that? No, if you read what he's saying here in Hebrews chapter 10, he's saying don't forsake the assembling. Or he didn't say how often to meet together. Just say don't forsake the assembly. We need to, as a church, we've got to come together. We've got to have times where we meet and we sing songs. The Bible tells us to sing psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, where we encourage one another, where we hear the preaching, where we get encouraged to go out there and live for the Lord and do all that kind of things. That's what church is all about. And he's saying, don't forsake that. And then he says, so much the more as you see the day approaching. He's not saying more times that you meet. I believe what he's saying is, so much the more it's important that we meet. It's even more important than ever as we see the days coming. Because the Bible tells us as the days leading up to the Lord coming back, times are going to get rough. And there's going to be people falling away, and there's going to be persecution of the church, and there's going to be all kinds of wickedness, and it's going to be like the days of Lot and like the days of Noah. And as we see the day approaching, we need to come out from among them and be separate. So we have to have those times where we meet together. And the title of the message, I guess I didn't tell you that, is the Midweek Service. Okay, and the idea is the importance of having a midweek service. But the reality is, it doesn't matter when. I'm not just preaching a message on how we need to have church on Wednesday. I mean, we did have church on Wednesday, and you guys were here, and I'm preaching to those who are already here on Wednesday. So I'm not telling you, hey, you need to be more faithful to Wednesday night service. What I'm telling you is the importance of having a Wednesday night service is that it's a long time from Sunday to Sunday. And so we have to get together. So, I heard somebody say one time, traditionally for many years we've heard this, that Jesus rose on Good Friday. Died on the cross on Good Friday. And I don't know when it was. I don't completely understand how all that works out. But people started adding things up, and this is Jesus said, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. And if you count it up from Friday to Sunday, there's just no way to make that 3 days and 3 nights between those two. So if you do the math, most people have come to this conclusion that, well, it must have been on a Wednesday night that he died on the cross. So I have actually heard people say, like, you have to have a Wednesday night service because that's when Jesus died on the cross. That's why we do it on Wednesdays. And the truth is, I see that nowhere in the Bible. And then historically, I've never heard that before. Only thing I think the reason that they met on Wednesdays is because, hey, it's too long to go from Sunday to Sunday without coming together as a church family. And so they said, well, let's have a midweek service. Of course, in Kansas City, we do it on Thursday. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think it would be neat, even if we didn't have 2 different works going on, to meet on a Thursday. And I've always thought about that as a preacher, how it'd be good to have a Thursday night service. That way you have Wednesdays free. You can go to another church somewhere that has their Wednesday services, and you could go jump into their service from time to time. And it doesn't really matter. When we meet, the idea is that we meet, and we don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And so, of course, I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak, with you all. But again, that's not even the point of the message. I'm not saying that you need to be more faithful. I'm just saying this is why we do it, and how we can have that atmosphere in our Christian life more regularly, other than Sunday. Because I'm telling you this, those who only come on Sundays, and then let's say something happens and they get sick and they can't be there on that Sunday, now they've gone 2 weeks before they come back Sunday, and I can guarantee you that things in their life are not where they should be by that time. I'm not saying they fell into some great sin. I'm just saying, like, there's spiritual oppression, there's things aren't going right, there's this, and I've had a lot of people come to me and tell me that that's how they felt when they missed a day of church, or they, for some of us, missed soul winning. We get so used to going soul winning, whenever you don't do that, to get back into that the next time is harder, and you just feel like you kind of let the Lord down or whatever. And so what obligations that you make and the responsibilities that you take on, you got to keep that up, and then do not just that. I would say continue to do that or more. And that isn't that true in life too? Like, I was thinking about this the other day. Obviously, physically, there comes a point in our life where we can't do things the way that we used to do it. Okay, but theoretically, I was thinking about my life right now and the amount of work or exercise that I get or whatever, and I thought, well, theoretically, if I maintain the amount of exercise that I do now or more, then I should always be healthy and strong and be able to do those things, right? Theoretically. But eventually there comes a time where I can't do that because of time, or because maybe I'm injured, or I'm hurting too bad or something. And so I'm now doing less. Well, when you do less, you're not going to get stronger and healthier. That's just the nature of life. And so as we get older, we're forced to do less and less, and then our health deteriorates. And so I was thinking about that, but spiritually it's the same way. Whatever we're doing, we need to maintain what we're doing or do more in order to stay spiritually active and spiritually healthy. So if we do less, then obviously we're taking steps backwards spiritually. I don't think it matters when you meet or how many times you meet, but as a church, we've got to be coming together, or else we're not going to come out from among the world and be separate. And we're going to start to love the things of this world because we're affected by it so much. Already, if you work, an average, I'll make mention of this again in a minute probably, but, I'll just mention it now. So another reason that we can't meet like that every time is because we have responsibility to work. We got to go to jobs. We got to pay the bills. We got to make sure things are done around the house or whatever. And the average, I don't know about average, but a work day according to the Bible, we could read from that parable. I don't remember if I preached that here or in Kansas City, but that parable where the workers come, and on the 11th hour, some people come and work, and then on the 12th hour, they get paid the same as the people that worked all 12 hours, and they get paid a penny, which sounds pretty little to us, but that was a day's wage, okay? So let's say it was like $100, $200. I don't know what a day's wage really is, but, for one day's work, and then And so what that shows us, though, is it was 12 hours of work that they did. And we live in a society that's, they try to do like a Monday through Friday and then have 2 days off, depending on, what kind of work you do, whatever. But we see that the Bible says, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, and the seventh day is that, so that's something that they observed from the beginning of time. 6 days you have to do all your work. Sometimes you're going to have to work 6 days, 12-hour shifts. Zachary's like, yeah, I know what that's like. In fact, some days it's 7 days a week. But that's a work week, How are you going to go to church? You definitely can't go every day. And so how are you going to do that? And so think about that. If you're in a workplace that's very worldly minded, and there's a lot of gossip going on, and there's people doing things that they shouldn't be doing or whatever, and it kind of just rubs off on you, and you're there for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, who's getting the most attention, the flesh or the spirit? And so that's even more important, that we find a way to come out from among that and be separate. So obviously, if we recreated an atmosphere like camp and did it every day, well, then theoretically we would come out from the world and be separate, but that wouldn't really be healthy. It's not possible. We'd be breaking some of the some of God's instructions to us, because we wouldn't be working, we wouldn't be evangelizing and all that. So that's not a reality. That's not a possibility. Also another problem with that is the location. For us, it's not that bad. We don't have to drive that far for church. But think this through, and I'm setting up my second point here. Think this through. In the book of Revelations, it mentions the 7 churches of Asia. Okay, those were actual churches that existed. And if you look up in a map that puts where the churches were, I don't know how they know that for sure, but approximately where the churches are. You got like Ephesus and Laodicea, for instance. And if you look at them, none of those churches, all of those churches are probably about 100 miles apart from each other. So you got this church, 100 miles, you got this church, 100 miles from there is this church, 100 miles, around that, something like 100 miles. And so, you understand why they had to have so many churches in Asia Minor, because what if there was only one church in Asia Minor? Everybody had to go to that one church. How would you ever go there? Okay, so even if, probably in Ephesus, for instance, you probably stayed pretty close to the city, and so you didn't have quite as far to go. But let's say you live somewhere between Ephesus and Laodicea. Let's say you live right in the middle. You still got to go 50 miles to get to that city where that. And so I don't know where everybody lived in relationship to their church, but obviously we live in a time now where I can drive to Kansas City, preach, and then come back to Iola and preach the evening service, and it's not really that difficult. Back then they couldn't do that. They couldn't travel that far, 100 miles. Did you know this, that 100 miles? You could look this up for yourself and see what you find. But do you know that humans can outrun a horse in a 100-mile race? I don't mean that they can keep up with the horse and go faster than the horse, but eventually that horse will have to stop and get some water and take a rest, and so they'll have to walk it, or else it'll just get overhydrated. But technically, a man, as long as he has enough water to drink, I guess, could make that 100 miles, and there are people that can run 100 miles in like 12 hours, 13 hours. That's pretty incredible. It is humanly possible, though, and the horses can't do that. And so because you could say, like, oh, yeah, well, they had horse and carriage. No, they still couldn't do that. They still had to stop along the way. They had to make sure their animals had water and all that kind of stuff. It would take an entire day or maybe 2 days to get to a church that was that far away. And so the reality is that you couldn't meet every day and still do all that. So, which brings me to my second point. Here's what they could have done. They could have said, well, instead of having one church that we all just go to every day, we could just have church at home. And there are places who have tried to start this kind of house church thing. And I'm not against people meeting in houses, okay? I am against that. If you ever study out what the house church movement is all about, I am against that, okay? Because basically what they do is just the husband is the pastor, and like that actually is their church, and they don't ever go to another church. Maybe they have fellowships or something like that. I don't believe that's the way God designed it. I believe God designed it for the people to assemble together. That's what church means, is an assembly. And I don't think it just meant this little assembly of your family in your house, but let's just break it down. How could we come out from among the world, be separate? Well, even if you work in the secular world, or you're doing some kind of job that gets all your attention and all, and you want to come out and you want to serve the Lord, you could at least every night meet with your family. You could sit down, have a devotion, have some prayer, sing a song, and all that stuff. And basically, every single day, you'd be coming out and you'd be reminding yourselves, hey, we need to get out of the world. We need to focus on the Lord and do all those kinds of things. Okay? But let me give you I'll just read these for the sake of time, but here, let me give you some examples that there were churches that met in houses. Okay? Romans 16:5 says, likewise, greet the church that is in their house. Salute my well-beloved Epaenetus, who is of the first fruits of Achaia unto Christ. 1 Corinthians 16:19 says, the churches of Asia salute you. Aquila and Priscilla salute you much in the Lord with the church that is in their house. Colossians 4:15, salute the brethren which are in Laodicea and Memphis, and the church which is in his house. Philemon 1:2 says, and our brother Apphia and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and the church in thy house. Okay, so obviously there were churches that met in houses. Now let me explain to you what I think, and I can't prove this necessarily, but I think there's a very good biblical argument that could be made here. We see in the Bible that there's many times when pastors are mentioned, it's a plurality of elders. Okay, so there are people who have got this mindset that every church has to have a plurality of elders because they read the Bible and it says ordain elders in every city. Okay, and so they compare that with other verses and they say, okay, so let's say he went to Ephesus and started the church of Ephesus, and they think of a building that's planted and it has that building and this is the church, and then they say, and then he ordained elders in Ephesus. Okay, so I think that the logical conclusion that some people are making is that there are lots of elders in that one church and they're holding each other accountable and all that kind of stuff. But every church that starts trying that, like, hey, we're not going to have one pastor over us, we're going to have a plurality of elders. Well, guess what? One of those is going to be the chief. And it's going to be the same. It's just going to be like having a pastor and having some deacons, or having a pastor and having some assistant pastors or something like that. There's no way to have all those guys just equally ruling over the church and all that stuff. But some people think that that's what has to be because that's what the Bible says. Well, I believe the reason it always says elders, plural, is because you could not have one church, again, where every time somebody needed to get with the pastor, they had to go down to the building, or they couldn't call up their pastor and say, hey, we need you, whatever. And so I think they just split it up, and they said, we will meet when we can meet. Let's say it was just on Sundays. Maybe they didn't even have a midweek service. I don't know. And so they came and they met at that one kind of general assembly. And the Bible uses the word general assembly, and it's actually talking about in heaven when all believers assemble up together. That's the general assembly. But they had a general assembly where they would all gather together. And so when Paul, by the way, when he goes to Ephesus for the last time, and he thinks he's getting ready to go to Jerusalem to die, Paul calls for like a meeting of all the elders in Ephesus. And I don't think it meant all the elders that were in that church building or something like that. I think he meant like all the elders that were scattered around Ephesus would come to that meeting where they would have the main pastor over that would be, the bishop over there. Okay, and so the reason why I think they did that is because you needed somebody local. You needed kind of like this small group to, there's a contact person that you can go to and all that stuff. And so maybe they all did live in that house. A lot of times there would be a lot of people living in one house. And maybe they would have Bible studies, and maybe they would sing songs and pray together and do all that stuff. But regardless, we all have homes. And we have either our family, our husbands, wives, children, or else we have sisters, or we have, some family member, of some sort. Most everybody has somebody that they can associate with at home. And so, because here's what I'm saying. Obviously, we could all every night or every morning read our Bibles and pray and do that, and that's going to help us separate from the world. And by the way, we need to do that. But the Bible says where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of you. That sounds like he wants us to assemble with others. He wants us to be in agreement with, 2 or 3 witnesses so that we can all, encourage each other in that way and sing together, and iron sharpens iron and all that kind of stuff. So it's important that we assemble, and even if we can't assemble at church, you can still assemble at your house with your family or with a couple friends or with whatever. So, I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to tell you that just transitioned right into my third point, because we know that we can't assemble every day at a church in a general assembly kind of a way. That's just not realistic. So that's why we have the midweek service, so that we can at least meet twice a week, okay? Or they say 3 to thrive, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, okay? But you're not like less spiritual of a person if you can't make it 3 times a week. That's not the idea. Well, you have responsibilities, you have things that you have to do, but we need to make a point to come to church and meet with our brothers and sisters. But we also can't just say, like, well, I'll just meet every day after work with my little study group or with my family or at my house or whatever. That's nice, but you really have to come together as an assembly from time to time. And so it only makes sense that the third way is the way that we do it, which is we all come together, as often as we can. For us here, it's Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. In Kansas City, it's Sunday afternoon, and it's Thursday, and then we got some soul winning times, which we also do here. So Saturdays we can get together and do that too. And, the idea is having a routine where you say, I'm going to get together on these days. I'm going to be faithful to that. Maybe every once in a while add in another day when there's a special service or a special time or a special meeting. And this is the best that we can do. And I believe everybody's trying to do that here, especially on a Wednesday night. But this is the importance of the Wednesday night service, that we assemble as often as we can. But you know what? Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, that's really not enough, because we still got a long time between Sunday and Wednesday, and a long time between Wednesday and Sunday, and obviously a lot of things can go wrong, spiritually speaking, when it comes to the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life. And so we need to have as much as we can that every day coming out of the world. Now, we can't go to camp every day. We can't come to church every day, have a service every day, but we can meet as often as we can, and we can meet together on off days with friends and family or with our house and have those things. And so I want to encourage you to do that, because what happens every year after camp, I know after working in children's ministries for so long and working as a youth pastor and going to camp with teens and stuff, not only with the ones I have, but talking to other youth pastors and other camp leaders. I mean, this is not just unique to any church. Every church has this problem, and that is everybody's spiritually charged and pumped up after a week of camp, and then by the time you get to next year, you need it all over again, because everybody forgot all the commitments they made. Everybody stopped, reaching out to friends and encouraging. They stopped reading their Bibles. They stopped doing all those things. In fact, it's not like 6 months later. It's usually like 5 days after camp or 3 days. I actually know some people that the day they come home from camp, I've had we brought kids back from camp, and the moment we send them over to their parents, we hear them say something like, hey, we're going to the movies tonight, and then your friends are coming over, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know if that's the devil's behind that, or if that family was like really like, hey, you had all that week at camp, I need to give you a break. And so they think that they're helping or what, but what they're doing is just throwing them right back into the world. And then they go to school, and most of them were in public school, and then they watching Hollywood and on their devices, and they go right back to that. And so it was rough even to get a kid to come every Sunday, let alone Sundays and Wednesdays, and no chance that they're meeting with somebody like every day of the week. But man, we can do that. We can do that. We can encourage other people to do that. I think it's obviously to meet on Sundays and Wednesdays is about the least amount that we can do. But we can do a whole lot more than that on our own. All right, let's all stand, be dismissed in a word of prayer, and maybe a quick course. Lord, we thank you for your word, and I thank you for this week, and certainly the opportunity I have to go to camp and experience what I'm talking about with just getting away from things and being under the preaching and Bible reading and singing and all. Lord, but help us to, as Christians, to think about in our lives, recreating that as often as we can. Not recreating it, but actually afresh and new every day, Lord, seeking you and seeking encouragement and assembling ourselves together, and whatever we can do, Lord, to walk in the Spirit and not in the flesh. I pray that you'll help us do that in Jesus' name, amen.